Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Stephen Shanks. I'm the president of Erchonia. I've been doing regulatory research with the FDA clinical trial since 1998. With me is Travis Sammons. Travis, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Hello. So I work under Steve Shanks as the clinical affairs manager. Together as a team, we design studies, we work with the FDA and publish all of our data as well.
So what we're looking to do today is we want to talk about class 4 laser therapy. We get a lot of questions. What's the difference between class 4 lasers, class 3B lasers? Really what we want is to give you factual information. We're going to start out what the FDA considers, and we're going to start kind of get into what people are legally allowed to say. If you disagree with something, that's fine. Feel free to question us, ask us questions as we go, because this is information. In the future, if you like these, we could start doing one on power and penetration. We could do one on LEDs. We could start getting cosmetic indications. We just want to make this factually based information that you guys can understand the complexity of the laser therapy market.
And as Steve mentioned, we are open to questions. Actually, we prefer questions. So there should be a Q&A box on your screen at any time, any slide. Feel free to enter your question. Steve and I will stop there and make sure we get it answered for you.
Okay, the first thing we'd like to talk about for us at Erchonia, the first thing we start with is the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. We want to be able to legally market our devices, and we want to be able to talk about the research that we've performed and the 510(k) statements we received from the FDA. So when you start looking at infrared lasers or topical heating devices, this is the category that they're under. They're under infrared lamps for therapeutic heating. So this is different than low-level lasers, which are in a completely different category called NHN. So you could see the ones for topical heating are ILY.
And I'll let Steve take a lot of the FDA, even though I deal with them now. Steve, from the get-go, 1997, I believe, was your first interaction with the FDA. So he knows the product codes, the regulations better than anyone out there.
So this is actually what the FDA has for this product code. As you can see, it's an infrared lamp intended for medical purposes that emit energy at infrared frequencies, approximately 700 to 50,000 nanometers, to provide topical heating. This is the category. So this every class 4 laser that's out there is topical heating, and they're in this category.
Perfect. And then as part of the category 2, which is the regulation of CFR 890, a device must elevate the skin temperature 40 to 45 degrees Celsius, which is 104 to 113 degrees Fahrenheit, for a acceptable amount of therapeutic time, which is typically 5 to 10 minutes.
And when you increase the power of your watts of your laser, all you're doing is increasing the time or shortening the time it takes you to heat the skin. So this category is not new. This category has been around since 1976. 1976, the ILY category was grandfathered into the US FDA for topical heating devices or heating pads. So I pulled up some of these old ones because you can't find them on the FDA's website. So for instance, if you look at that Intralux heat lamp, it's a heat lamp. Home care clinics, infrared heat. So these are heating lamps, and you can see up top where you've got 25, 26, 27, 30. That means even at this point, there's 30 pages of these infrared heat lamps.
And this is public information as well. So if you go to fda.gov, you click on the medical device tab. Under product code, currently we're talking about class 4 lasers, so it's going to be ILY. You'll find everything that Steve's mentioning here. Erchonia, which is a whole nother PowerPoint or webinar we'll get into, is under the NHN, which is non-heating laser, which requires clinical data and specific indications for use.
So the reason we put this slide in here, in 1998, we got a letter from the FDA, a warning letter, saying we're marketing our device without a proper 510(k) clearance. So as we started going through the process, the FDA said, you need to find a device out there that's light-based. What you're going to do is you're going to submit a substantial equivalence, and we're going to say not substantially equivalent. In this case, we used the Bale's photonic stimulator. So we use that as a predicate, and then the FDA said, you're going to have to submit a double-blind, randomized, multi-site, placebo-controlled clinical trial to get FDA market clearance. That clinical trial was so successful, the FDA didn't accept it, and we had to do another one. So again, indications for use. Again, these devices are now 510K exempt. So what does 510K exempt? 510K exempt means as of 2017, as long as you're topical heating the skin to 40 to 45 degrees, you're allowed to go to market with your device. Requires no clinical data. Nothing in this category has ever required any clinical data. So basically, you build a device, you say that you're heating the skin, and you can market your device. The problem, as you all know out there in these class 4 lasers, they claim pretty much everything under the sun.
So we did get one question. Let's see here, I want to keep company names out of the webinar. So you'll see when we go through this, we even blot out names because that's not the point of it. But in essence, the question was, why do so many doctors that use it X company laser, that's a class 3 and 4, use it on the head and brain when they are not FDA approved for doing so? So that's a great question.
If it was me, there is no way I would shine a device that heats up the brain. They are not FDA cleared. They're not FDA cleared to even touch the brain anywhere. It's contraindicated. Joints are contraindicated. And again, it's topical heating for muscle relaxation.
Yeah, and there's going to be a slide about midway through this presentation where we've pulled research what happens at a DNA level at that 40 to 45 degrees Celsius. I don't want to steal the thunder yet, so I'll get there. But once you read that slide, I think you'd be really, really hesitant to put that class 4 laser on your head.
So like we talked about, marketing claims for ILY devices are topical heating and muscle relaxation. Now, we blocked out the name of a company that got a warning letter, and there's lots of these class 4 lasers that get warning letters because they start marketing for things outside of topical heating and muscle relaxation. So if you're a class 4 laser and all you can do is say topical heating and muscle relaxation, because you have no research that you submitted to the FDA for your device, you got to start increasing your marketing claims. This isn't just class 4 lasers. This is pretty much medical device manufacturing. They start going outside their claims. It's just a matter of time before the FDA catches up with them, and they got to start answering these letters. The problem is if you've gone out and spent $50,000 or $60,000 for a class 4 laser, what are you going to do with the device? So, I was on the web the other day. I saw a device 60 watts from China for $1,600. So what's the difference between a $1,600 device at 60 watts versus a $60,000 device with 50 watts or 40 watts or 30 watts? There's really no difference. It's just some come with marketing claims that are not factually based. So these are some of the things that these class 4 lasers are claiming that they're not FDA cleared for.
All right, now Steve's kind of mentioned from the opening slide, today we're going to look at class 4 lasers, the power output, the wavelength, the coherence as well. Each one of those subjects, we could spend 30 minutes each, and we do intend on doing so in the future as well. So we'll do a PowerPoint or webinar just on power. But for today, to keep this at a manageable time frame, we're going to do a quick overview. So what does power change? So increasing the watts or the milliwatts. All it's doing is emitting more photons per second. It doesn't change the amount of energy per photon. We'll speak of that, the energy per photon, when we speak towards the wavelength. Increasing the power does not increase depth penetration. That is one of the biggest myths I think that may be out in the industry right now. So this is a really cool calculator. You can sound like a genius to your patients, but if you just go online, you can plug in the photon energy, which is going to correspond to the wavelength. So here at 1.95, that's going to be a 635 wavelength that we use. The power, you can plug that in as well, which for this example, I have 10 milliwatts. And what it shows you is the flux, so photons per second. At 10 milliwatts, a device is emitting 31 quadrillion photons per second. So that's another one I had to Google search because that's a lot of zeros and digits. 100 milliwatts, 310 quadrillion photons, and then a 1 watt laser is 3,100 quadrillion photons per second.
Yeah, and your body does not have that many cells.
Yeah,
So you can see how much over treating this is. And like Travis mentioned, when you're increasing the power with these lasers, you're just increasing the heat and you're getting there faster with the heat.
yeah. So if you on that bottom right, if you keep changing the power, it does not change the top left, which is the energy. Again, we'll get into that. But what we wanted to show you here, as a simple example that Steve and I ran across, is the eye. It has the highest density of photoreceptors per centimeter square of any part of the body. In the bright sunlight, the human eye can only receive about 10 milliwatts of light, which if you go back, is about 31 quadrillion photons per second can enter the eye, which is the most absorbent of any tissue in the body. Not all that light is being absorbed. It's being reflected, scattered, and passed through unabsorbed. So what does that mean? You can continue to crank up the power, throw more photons at it, but it's not absorbing it. Another thing with turning up the power is you're delivering the dosage in a short amount of time. This is a really good article where they compared different treatment regimens. So they looked at 3 and 30 joules per centimeter squared, delivered in 2 different radiance power outputs, 5 and 50 milliwatts. The only ineffective dose was trying to deliver a short dose with a high power, which took 1 minute of treatment time. So that's why we do not crank up the power. We could get shorter treatment times, but it is at the cost of treatment effectiveness.
And like Travis mentioned in the last slide, if I'm putting out quadrillions of photons per second, how much more power do I need? Because the body is only going to use what it needs. It's going to reflect the rest of it.
Yeah, and I think another important takeaway from this article here is both the 30 and the 3 joules per centimeter square actually showed a therapeutic effectiveness. But what was more important than the dose is the power. So a lot of doctors nowadays, and it's not your fault, it's the marketing that's out there, and we'll get into some of the watt guidelines out there. It speaks to joules per centimeter square. That it overcomplicates laser therapy, and it's not as important as the actual power itself. So a couple examples, and once we do our power webinar down the future, we'll dig into these a little bit more. But laser therapy with the Arnold Schwartz law, usually you want to be between the 0.5 and 4 joules per centimeter squared. The middle article, if you haven't read it, it's a great one. It's Harvard Medical School biphasic dose response. They compared several different studies, different outputs, different joules per centimeter square. What they found was 3 to 5 joules per centimeter square was beneficial, while 50 to 100 was less beneficial and possibly even detrimental.
And as Travis brings this up, if you've got a 10-watt laser and a therapeutic dose is 5 joules, you hit that in a half a second. So just start thinking about how much power and how much photons these things are generating.
Yeah, and even in the conclusion, which we don't have there, I may not quote this exactly how it's published, but it was more effective to use a lower power than a high power is what the authors concluded. You want to take the Walt, since I know they reached out to you personally?
Oh, yeah. So Walt reached out to us in 2014 and NALT, they wanted to get away from the term low-level laser therapy. And they wanted to come up with this new term that they thought was great, photobiomodulation. I said, well, photobiomodulation, according to your definition, includes LEDs, which we use as placebos, low-level lasers, which we do, low power, infrared lasers, which don't create photochemistry, and broadband light, which there's no research on it. So we declined. We still believe the correct term is low-level laser therapy, and we'll kind of start getting into not so much into low-level laser therapy, but power and how the effect that it has and why we don't really get into a lot of these terms.
Let's save that one. So this, I'm gonna spend a little time on, because it ties into that first question about using a class 4 on the head and brain. And this, as I mentioned, there being a couple articles that looked at that temperature range between 40 to 45 degrees Celsius. This is one of them here. So heating to about 45 degrees Celsius, increased free radical formation by almost double, and antioxidant power was reduced about 50%. Another journal here, International Journal of Pharmacology. If you look at 40 to 100 degrees Celsius, most protein membranes start to unwind. And then between that 42 to 50 range, if that lasts for several minutes, that tissue already starts to undergo necrosis. Nope, I think we're good. So next topic is coherence. So most class 4 lasers, not most, all of them, they're going to be unfocused. The reason being, if you focus a class 4 laser, such as this article shows, at a common wavelength of 810 and 2 watts, if it was a focused beam at 271 seconds, you would start ablating tissue. So what does that mean in regards to laser therapy? They take off the collecting lens, as you can see here, to spread the energy out, but it comes at the cost of now they no longer have a coherent laser. It's a non-coherent beam.
So that's, you can see that beam right there. This is every class 4 laser that's out there, like Travis mentioned. And if you want to heat the muscle tissue, this is a great way to do it. If you want to use it therapeutically for things besides muscle, this is not a very good way to do it, because like Travis said, this is not a coherent light. The electron transport chain is coherent.
So a couple articles with the coherence. Molecules absorb coherent laser several times more actively than incoherent light with a larger broadband width. And if anyone wants these articles, feel free to type it in either the text box or the Q&A box, and we'll make sure we send it to you personally. There's a lot on coherence and a lot of fun stuff that Steve and I have found recently, as he mentioned, with even the electron transport chain and coherence. Another example is quantum light. Coherence in biology is biophotons, which most of us are somewhat familiar with. The more incoherent the biophotons, the signal, the less light and information is exchanged between the cells, resulting in a change in energy yield and a change in frequency. There's even articles where incoherency in the biophotons causes diseases. So this is another example how the body uses coherent light to transport messengers, energy for a healthy state, and incoherency for disease.
So when we do an LED presentation, we'll get into all of this, because there's other research that says LEDs or incoherent light is 75% less effective than coherent light.
Just read some of this comments here. It looks like most of them just requesting articles. So absolutely, we'll make sure to send everyone the articles after this. Another topic is going to be the wavelength. Let's see. So as we mentioned earlier, changing the power does not change the energy. So when we speak to energy, we're speaking towards electron volt or photon energy.
Or how much energy is each photon.
Correct.
And that's really important when you're looking at photochemistry versus photophysical.
So the shorter the wavelength, the higher the electron volt. And these are the common wavelengths we use, and you have the infrared. So at 405, which is a violet color beam, you have 3.06 EV. Red, which is 635, 1.95 EV. 830, which is infrared, is 1.49 EV. So it's just as a simple kind of takeaway. Violet has 70% more energy per photon than the 830 nanometer. So And energy is not all about bragging rights. It plays an important part in biology. So if you look at photochemical versus photophysical effects, it is well cited that the minimum amount of energy to create a photochemical effect is going to be 1.7 EV, which correlates to 730 nanometers. Here's a couple sources. One thing we always like to do in our publications is cite the sources. This is from Georgia State University. In essence, they looked at infrared interactions. The quantum energy of infrared photons is 0.001 to 1.7 EV, as I mentioned. In this range, you're going to create molecule vibrations, which we'll get into a little bit more. But in essence, that molecule vibration is what creates heat or topical heating. Visible light, on the other hand, is the elevation of the electrons to higher energy, which is what we are trying to accomplish with laser therapy, because that is what creates the photochemical effect. Another, I'm a visual person, so it's kind of repetitive on the last slide, but it's very simple the way it breaks it down, at least. If you look at infrared, stronger absorption vibrates molecules. Physiological effect is heating, since it's putting the molecules into a vibrational motion. Visible light strongly absorb because it causes electrons to jump to higher levels, not enough energy to ionize, which is important. So I don't know if this breaks it down. Okay, but once you get into UV light or X-rays, you start causing ionization, which that is one of the reasons we get the question quite a bit is, how do you know your lasers are safe? Why are you not getting side effects? It's because we are not causing ionization. We're not causing that electron or the atom to break off. Basically, whatever energy is not used in that cell is just passed through. You want that one, Steve?
Yes.
Let's just look at the
So
Q&A real fast.
This is, we really like this slide because it really, when you're hitting the body with an infrared laser, we'll do infrared lasers first. Most of that energy or all that energy is absorbed by water. So when Travis was talking about the vibration, as you start throwing the photons with no energy, it's absorbed by the water molecules. The water molecules start to vibrate. They start to vibrate, they create heat. So think about what they're sold as. If I increase the power, I'm going to get greater penetration. Well, that might be true if you're talking about heat penetration, but you're not talking about a photochemical response. So that's really the difference between visible light and infrared light. Visible light, it creates a photochemical effect. Infrared light does not create a photochemical effect. We like to explain a photochemical effect is similar to a biochemical effect. If I swallow a pill, we'll call it Advil. I want to introduce reduce TNF alpha. I'm going to swallow a pill. I'm going to create a photochemical effect. Means it's systemic. If I'm going to use a red laser, green laser, violet laser, laser in a tissue, I'm going to reduce TNF alpha, which is inflammation. I'm going to get a systemic effect. We know that because we've done the research. That is not going to happen with an infrared laser. You are not going to get a photochemical effect.
So we have another question. It's a really good one. How can certain companies, well, skip this part here. If this information is available in literature, how can certain companies get away with misleading their docs, telling them it's okay to use on the head and brain if it's dangerous per the studies? It's a great question. At the end of this slide, I'll show you some of the misleading material that the companies are putting out there. It's not going to speak directly to the head and brain, but it is going to speak towards them using the perimeters of low-level laser to back up a class 4 laser, which is definitely misleading.
And when you're asking that question, just think about how ethical that company is if they're going to go out and make statements. The reasons why we want to put up all of this research is because you can go back and compare it to what those class 4 laser companies are saying. Go to any one of their websites. They're going to cite research, like Travis said, and it's all going to be low-level laser research. because not one class 4 laser has ever submitted any data to the FDA to get a 510K or a market clearance to obtain their 510K.
And as we did with the power, this is with, the wavelength. We like to cite our sources. Once we do our wavelength webinar, we'll get into this more in depth. I think that, a couple like the turn and hold, visible and infrared affect biostimulation in different ways. Visible light flicks photochemical changes, while infrared can only produce physical changes. Stanford University, although visible light can produce photochemistry, infrared radiation only produces molecular rotations and vibration. And then the last article there, they actually looked at the therapeutic benefit of INOS, and they concluded that the higher wavelengths weren't able to create photochemistry because they didn't meet the minimum quantum energy of 1.7 electron volts. So hopefully we hammer that number down in your head where if there's any questions, whether your laser's photophysical, whether it's photochemistry, always think of that 1.7 EV.
Yeah, and then thinking about that question that was asked about people treating these things with people's brains. All you're doing is creating heat in the brain, which is not a very good idea.
And last section here ties into the last question is, why is there so much confusion in the industry? A lot of it, it may be on purpose. Some of it may, be unintentional as well, which I don't know, based on the Walt definition of photobiomodulation, as Steve covered earlier, it was probably unintentional as they try to group everything into one. But if anything, it causes more confusion. The reason being is they grouped in the lasers, they grouped in the LEDs, they grouped in visible light with infrared light. That's like saying every pharmaceutical is the same because you swallow it, even though it's not. Every one of those has a different mechanism of action. The other thing we wanted to point out here, highlighted, is class 4 lasers cannot use the term photobiomodulation as it's a non-thermal process. So,
and everyone will use that term photobiomodulation because there is so much research on photobiomodulation and very little on heat.
Yeah, so we as a company we try to stay away from this term. If you look at our website, if you look at our publications, we do everything. We always we use the term low level laser therapy because it makes more sense of what we're doing. And again, the confusion there. So if you group everything into one, you've kind of lost the validity of the actual technology itself. So I went to PubMed. I just searched low level laser placebo controlled. 447 results or studies have been published on PubMed. I did the same thing with class 4 laser placebo controlled. It had a results of 7. And I can say 2 or 3 of those at least, without going through each one, actually were for ablating tissue, which is not the intention of a class 4 from a laser therapy standpoint. And then this is the misleading information that we're speaking of. So this is a class 4 laser. Again, I blotted out the name of the company because it's irrelevant, but they send out a scientific journal or studies to promote their product. Took a look at a few of these studies they're promoting. Remember, they're a 3.3 watt laser. The first study was the biphasic dose response, going back to the Harvard study that mentioned lower power is better than higher power. They also chow management of neck pain, which if you read the study itself says, and they use outputs 4 to 450 milliwatts. So 3 watts is 3,000 milliwatts. Investigators found in the study, if you use anything outside of that dose, it did not show any benefit at all. So it takes 10 minutes of reading, but if you dig into what they're sending, it's contrary to what they're actually selling.
So, yeah, go ahead.
Sure.
You kind of see this is the depth of penetration. This is another reason why they're talking about misinformation. If you look on the left, they're saying that beam right there only penetrates into the dermis a little bit. The one on the right's a class 4 laser, and it miraculously penetrates deep into the tissue. So it penetrates deep into the tissue, but it's FDA cleared for topical heating. So you can see it's misleading by design. And again, this does not talk about photochemical effects. If you look on the right, that's research we did back in 2000. We knew back in 2000 we were creating photochemical effects. That's an abdominal MRI. This is for a research project we did on liposuction, which we got FDA cleared in 2004. We proved with a 10 milliwatt laser, 6 inches from the skin, manually scanned over the abdomen, can emulsify fat to 6 centimeters. And most journals you read, well, red lasers are good for topical conditions. Most all of you know with Erchonia, we have red, violet, green, low-level lasers, which disproves pretty much everything that you're going to read about photobiomodulation, which is why we do not use the term.
Yeah, as Steve mentioned, we don't use the term photobiomodulation, but we also, I think we've kind of erased it from all of our website as well as depth of penetration, because that's not how lasers work. It's through energy transfer. So then maybe the direct beam itself, is absorbed in the first few millimeters, but from there, that energy is then passed on, which is why we're able to get those systemic effects. Even we've done experimental studies outside of what we've showed there for FDA approvals that, where we're lasering, the midsection, and we're seeing therapeutic or inch loss on extremities such as wrist, ankle, and areas like that. The question here that just came through: why do they say cold laser if they generate heat? I agree. Yeah.
What's politically correct? Well, they're misquoted. No,
Yeah.
Yeah, we agree with you. It's ridiculous. Cold lasers were there from the beginning since the 1960s to designate that from, when they were tissue ablating lasers, that basically when you shine them on your skin, they didn't create any sensation.
So here's another screenshot off a class 4 website, which if you were just digging in to buying a laser, I would be confused as well. I mean, they're showing that class 4 lasers provide more energy for deep conditions in less time. Higher wattage also results in faster treatment times. So under this, they had a link to their study, which was for rotator cuff. It was 12 treatments over 4 weeks, 15-minute per session. So I compare that to what Erchonia or class 2 protocols that went through FDA. Neck and shoulder pain, 1 treatment, 13 minutes. Plantar fasciitis, 6 treatments, 10 minutes each. Low back pain, 8 treatments, 20 minutes. So if you look at that side by side, you'd have the hard argument saying that 12 treatments, 15 minutes per treatment's faster than what's been proven.
I go back to
Yeah.
slide. So one thing we want to point out to you, when they're talking about power, okay, when you're increasing the power, you're not increasing energy at all. All you're doing is increasing how many photons you're shooting at the skin. So you're not changing the EV. So that electron volt is something that we've known about. We've been filing patents on since 2006. We know that to us is what's important about the electron transport chain, because it takes different energies, not photons, to change it.
Yeah, good point. So another question: what are the 5 or 10 bullet points we can put on our website to help inform and define why Erchonia lasers are better for most patients? These things need to be simplified for customers, for consumers. So let us work on that. But
We'll do a couple of tougher hits.
yeah, FDA clearance, we've proven it, double-blind placebo-controlled studies. And then I would go through each one of those subcategories we went through today, even if you just took the summary of it. So power, we're not going to heat up tissue. We're in a safe power range. Wavelength, we're using visible light, not infrared. So we're getting photochemistry instead of photophysical. We're not going to vibrate the cells. A lot of people at least know that somewhat through, plant-based. And what was the other one? Coherence as well. So I'd make sure that you at least have, even if it's one sentence on the importance of coherence in the body.
And then how, like, for instance, this slide right here, class 4 laser therapy. Topical heating. But at the bottom it says it treats deep tissue conditions. That is the most ridiculous statement I've ever heard.
Does the frequency of specific wavelengths correlate with type of tissue in the body? Are the laser effects calming or stimulating? So the wavelength correlates to different tissues of the body. I'll take that first because we didn't get into it here. It's certainly the protein complex is an electron transport chain. So complex 1 and 2, violet wavelength, complex 3, green, and complex 4, red. Steve and I could spend an hour talking about that. Calming and stimulating, that's, there's a lot on that, which if you look at parasympathetic, synthetic, but that's outside of what we're cleared for. So
Yeah, and we'll be able to answer that question in the future. Hopefully we're starting our autism clinical trials soon, and that's one of the things that we want to look at is calming down the autistic kids. Low-level laser is considered, visible light is considered a biomodulator. So anything that's in an excited state, it wants to bring to normal. Anything that's in a disease state, it wants to bring to normal. That's just how visible low-level lasers work. And that's part of the photochemistry.
yeah, and I mean, if you go to PubMed and you search low-level laser, parasympathetic, synthetic, you're going to get a lot of articles, and I think it's going to answer what you're looking for there. All right, I think that. That's just checking questions here to make sure.
Well, I just do not go through this. So this takeaway, power output less than 500 milliwatts, we consider low-level laser therapy. The term photobiomodulation could be used with this. Obviously, like we mentioned, we don't use it. It's non-thermal. It's a photochemical effect. More than 500 milliwatts, it's considered high-intensity laser therapy. And it's thermal photophysical. So it's two different complete mechanisms, and we do not think they should be thrown into photobiomodulation.
Yeah, so I mean, that was it from a slide standpoint. If you got questions, we're happy to give it a couple minutes here if you want to send anything through. And as Steve mentioned, hopefully, the goal today was to provide you, education on whether you have a laser, whether you're looking to buy a laser, of, what the proper definition of that, what the proper mechanism of action of that laser actually is.
And if you have purchased a class 4 laser, go back to laser manufacturer and ask them these questions. They should be able to give you these answers. Maybe we're wrong, but they should be able to prove that to you.